Hello, dear people. How are you? Welcome back. And thank you for following us up till now. Today, we're going to speak about something that I personally find utterly fascinating, and it is something that is incited my book. I think these are the first works that when I was working on them, there was like such epiphanies that kind of came about uh, that was the first time that I was contemplating extending my own work past the art, past the production of art, and anchoring my thoughts into something different.
So these are the seeds that led to your book. This is where the thought started.
Exactly. I mean, I'm paroling freedom as one of the main parameters that have pushed me towards art, but there is also something else. And ever since I was little, I was very interested in fundamental questions. It's a bit, again, like life is such a weird thing. It's such an odd thing. I initially intended my whole life, I wanted to study psychology. I was utterly fascinated by the human mind and its capacity to travel, traverse, and transfer a great amount of information, and then out of that structure something new. So art for me, especially the early period, has been investigation of such topics and these dimensions that occur. However, I found myself in a spot where I was frozen. I think it's just one of those things that when you come to understand what it truly means to be petrified by fear or frozen by fear, it becomes a very interesting dimension, because I wasn't only focused that I was in that state. I was utterly fascinated that a state as such can occur to begin with, especially there is a lot of knowledge contained within my body of a lot of different topics and a lot of different dimensions, and I was very fascinated to see that knowledge did not extend itself past my fear.
Your thoughts around this, did that have to do with the prolongedness of the state? Because I think paralyzed with fear is something that is an experience that people have to a varying degree at different points through their life, but I'm not sure if people normally experience extended.
That's true. I mean, especially it was very fascinating for me because as a dentist, I was used to having emergency cases where, like, petrified by fear was not part of my response at all. It wasn't part of my cycle, in the sense that I mean, that's not true. In a good Virgo spirit, I'm always very, very scared in the beginning, and then I kind of just went on. I think my father has turned gray when he was trying to learn to swim, because I could sit literally for 4 hours and absolutely refuse to go into the water until he pushed me from a pier one time, and then he drew.
I was gonna say this gives some context to the much familiar story.
Yes, I mean, but that's I think. But I think it's not until I was left alone with my fear that I actually kind of came to really to understanding how deeply embedded it is within me, and it would surface in new situations, especially like in new situations, especially later in the social contexts. But I've never experienced, but I would always manage to push through, as like people do. That's what evolution is in many ways. You push yourself. But this time around, I couldn't do anything. I mean, wow. Like, still looking back at it, it's a very fascinating period for me. And these works that I'm going to show you have all occurred during the same period while I was creating salmonella, fluff, and snickles, pot noodles as well. So they kind of occurred simultaneously. And
We can definitely say that if we were talking about subconscious creation the last time, this is maybe the epiphany of subconscious creation.
I think you can say that very well, like as you pointed out, because um, I would. It has taken me forever to finish the pieces that we spoke about last episode, out of many reasons, and but in the moments where I would stop and just, but there was a part of me that wanted to push my freedom even more. I wanted to be absolutely I wanted my movement on canvas to be completely unhinged. And yet every single time I was thinking about the cost of canvas, the size, the cost of paints, my own personal trajectory, the coordinates, just an overwhelming amount of thoughts that were equally real and not real materialize. They left me paralyzed and not necessarily wanting to. I felt there was more I wanted to say. I wanted there was so much more that I wanted to express, and the strength of it pushed me, but to such an extent that I couldn't move. But then, as I was mixing color, because I mixed my color on a glass plate, placed on a table, and I have painted that with gray on the background, so it could be neutral, so that I would see how I would mix my colors. I started just dabbling and messing, and I started finding a voice that I could assimilate myself with. Because what was difficult with me is that just kind of like giving the extent of my own personal experience and coming to an extent where I understand meaning with high granularity. I mean, just the context of my upbringing and the situation within that scope has been of such dimensions that one grows up quite quickly. I was thinking about what was political, economical, and social already at the age of 11, 12, because those were the circumstances. I mean, obviously, I had parents that were interested in those topics, but I was very focused on that, and at the same time, my mother, me being a neurologist and psychiatrist, kind of allowed for my mind to exist within a certain granularity of apprehension. So part of me wanted to paint these big canvases, as we have spoken about, where I've created salmonella and snickles and etc. But part of me really wanted to push for more freedom and to be freer. So while I was mixing colors, I just started moving, and those are the first times where I started to move again freely ish. And that is the dimension where the process, my own process, starting to breach the parameters that have been established by fear.
So I have a few questions regarding how this actually played out in practice, because you're obviously working on these other rather sizable works, and then you have this table where you come to do your mixing and everything. So this and did you become aware during the mixing of color that something was being created, or you were creating something? Did you sense that freedom whilst you were mixing, or is this more of a discovery that was done afterwards, that some sort of expression had happened?
Well, I guess I will answer that question from a different side. What I want to say is that I wanted to express myself. Like, I wanted my mind to be free, and I wanted a part of my personality that is kind of like that essence that have resided in me, that has not it cannot be not affected by war. But if you would like, do you remember that after we saw Neon Genesis Evangelion, you called me Pino for a while?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think, and you can confirm or affirm, no, you can confirm or deny this, but I feel my personality is quite a lot like Pino. Like I'm just kind of this like cute, lovable ball of fur and energy that kind of just pops out and wants to just spray everything with confetti. And the reason for that is that I've just learned that through, like, if you want to fight darkness within, you kind of have to push in a different direction. So I wanted my works to be that. I wanted my works to be the representation. Like, if any of you, I mean, I assume some of you have watched Paprika, the cartoon, the anime. And if you kind of, if anybody of you recalls Paprika the Parade, I think you have a very good picture of how my mind works. Like, I see shapes and colors everywhere, and all of that is connected to meaning. It's one of the reasons why I used to love, like, why I also still love fashion, because I just see all these different dimensions of references that kind of all come together for us to act out a fantasy, but also within that scope we create a fantasy. So it's the same thing with my artworks. I want to project that part of my mind because I know that that part of my mind was the key to my coming back to this world. And but every single time I would try to do that on canvas, I failed utterly. Like I could not. I was doing some of it on iPad, but it wasn't it. But this time, when I was just making a lot of mess on the table, I started recognizing shapes and forms. Suddenly, my mind started understanding the structure of, or like structures within my mind, and what was presented on that table were kind of fitting together. So I just started moving, and I would move for just a couple of inches, just like small incremental portions, and then image would occur.
I really do wonder, because it's interesting what you're saying there. I do wonder if how much it had to say that this was a very unconnected space to everything else. It didn't have the pressure of a canvas. It didn't have the expense. It didn't have any of those concepts that you were feeling the weight on from the other places. Also, I would almost say that it's very hard to go on a big canvas and express yourself without having some underlying essence of perfection in you. But this is your mixing table. Like, it is as free as it can get from all the concepts above.
But that's the interesting thing with freedom. Like I was thinking about it now because like I still can't, like I can understand factors that have kind of gone into me coming to stage where I was in a state where where my movement was very hindered, but simultaneously I can't. And it makes and one of the reasons why I've achieved a lot in my life is because I've learned how to let go. I've learned how to enter that state of inner peace where just like, okay, cool, and just go away. And it was very fascinating. And then I would still do my thing and things would turn out well. But it was very fascinating for me to enter this state where I've given myself freedom to do exactly that. But by doing so, I ended up binding myself in a very bizarre way. So it is not like it's not as when you think about it, like it comes as no surprise that I was able to let go since this came without pressure. But I could not understand, I still can't grasp why I was not able to let go on canvas, because these pieces have come about through this dimension where nothing mattered, where I was not bound by anything, or at least for a very brief moment in time.
Whilst interacting with the pieces behind.
Yeah.
I believe that, but I definitely think that with the bigger pieces, I think so the time frame it has taken to get to this place you are at now, I don't think that was the time frame that you were picturing whilst working on the other series. And I think that is probably some of the things that created that fear, that they were taking longer time than you predicted. They were moving outside of the schedule that you were comfortable with. And I think those are the things that made it hard for you to express yourself freely there compared to on this very different style.
Definitely. And I also think there's this dimension of layering and layers and peeling. Like, I have entered a very strong, like, throughout my upbringing, I've entered in a very strong dissonance with myself. And I don't believe there is one self. We have 37 trillion cells in the body, and that's an 37 trillion single units that each exist autonomously, and then they enter into a choir. So I don't think there is this one self in that dimension, in that context. But I also think that there was a part of me that wanted that was not assimilated with myself, neither my actions nor my words nor a lot of things. And I'm not sure how that ties. Like, we were kind of going back to the unified dimension versus the split one. For example, I've had always an experience of a split self. From a very early age, I could hear the voices in my head telling me, giving character and meaning to my existence, but at a different level than I've comprehended other children do. And I still, like, I don't have a unified sense of self. I just see self through the means of through means of action and reaction. So I don't anchor myself into this unified principle in a sense. But it was very interesting to me to see how how can we know things before they've ever happened? How can we have intuition about things that haven't happened, and yet then we have ability to resonate whether we want this or not? I mean, obviously we're kind of discussing a bit of evolutionary and evolution and genetics and a lot of different things, but the point is that the concepts are not very much different than the ones that extended this externality. So these pieces, these colors, I think kind of represent my inner. This kind of like naive world where cute animals, weird animals jump around and everybody's happy and everybody's just kind of like...
It's very soothing, and yeah, I think it's a very soothing landscape.
Yeah,
It's very pleasurable.
So this landscape kind of comes in with a table glued on the back side, because this is my mixing table. So, but what became apparent to me as I was working is that initially I always thought that I would do abstraction. Like, I was very drawn to abstraction. And obviously with my desire to free myself, I think the narrative that I've been following are within that scope. But then at the same time, there was this like cute and pink and fluffy creature that wanted to come out and merge the two. I think like Robert now has done a very nice job of kind of opening that dimension up in a very in a gorgeous way. However, I was going in a bit of a different direction, and the table isn't obviously the only thing I was painting at. All of my mixing boards ended up like this. This is another one. My spatulas, and the pizza box. These are actually, I loved painting on pizza boxes.
So is this
No, it's
pure
this way.
mixing, or is it also painted on afterwards?
No, it's this one. Well, no, I was mixing colors on all of these, so none of these have been intended as canvases. I was mixing my colors, and then it is kind of one of those beautiful moments. Like if you've been working hard, it's late at night, and then you just suddenly start staring at something, and then things open up. But that made me aware of something very different, something much more interesting, I think. And that is that at the core of my existence, there has always been this question of why things happen. I said that I wanted to study psychology, and I said that my but I always contemplate why things happen. I think my brain is a non-stop. I mean, everybody's brain is a non-stop machine, but I think you know better than everyone how much information passes through my mind and how I
You are definitely on quite a bit more, and I think actively engaging with these questions at a much higher rate than a lot of people around you.
exactly. I mean, exactly correct answer. Great. You're being a very good Christian right now. You're a great Christian. But what I'm trying to say is that I'm utterly fascinated by how this planet kind of came up. If not if how it came about, but in the sense, in the social and cultural sense, and political and economic, I'm very fascinated. And maybe that has to do with what I have been brought up with. But I'm very fascinated by this dimension where things travel. And I was looking at the process of my own process, and I was thinking how the process extends itself. We constantly territorialize and deterritorialize. I mean, not only we, it seems that's the inherent function of the process itself, where it the self is not contained only within the vessel. And I think there is a very interesting narrative there, because what we're speaking about is these dimensions of transfer and extension. I'm sorry, you wanted to say something?
No, just continue.
So, if you take a piece of paper and you scrunch it in your hand, what you will observe is that crunching will be a direct parallel to the force and placement exhibited on the paper, or extended to the paper. So the paper's shape and form will be reciprocal to the forces that have conjured it.
Combined with the paper's properties, but yes.
Of course, yes, thank you. So I started looking at that, and I was quite fascinated by the fact that this is this dimension of extension that I'm speaking about. So my mind, my thoughts, my force has been utilized in such a way that it has extended itself on a paper that will never again become white, it will never become smooth. And within it, whether it's unfolded or scrunched, it bears within itself this extension of the act, but also of everything that has preceded that act. It acts as a token of information that, if one has ability to look at it granularly, and I know there are people that have absolutely bizarre abilities to discern information from a lot of things, but for most of us, it will just look like a scrunch paper. But this idea that of the extended self started becoming quite fascinating to me. And I see that we've forgotten a couple of pieces over there that I wanted to show you, but I guess they will be portrayed later on the Instagram or on Twitter. And no, it's X now, it's not Twitter anymore. um, but I find it fascinating because I always contemplate why the world is as it is, why certain people go up, why certain people go down, what happens within the dimension of connection within the places we meet each other, especially in the context. Like, I think it's also very fascinating to think about like how when you meet people, I mean, you and me are very different in this sense. Like, I have very high granularity of recognition of people's faces and like how people interact, and from that on I can kind of assemble the movement or how to interact with people given that information, while you're much more anchored in your own apprehension.
So you are seeing and recognizing patterns that you are utilizing in regards to your experience with how you've seen that before.
Exactly. So patterns, patterns, patterns.
And yes, I'm definitely doing it a bit differently, less consciously at least.
You have a different approach and different upbringing, but I'm always just interested. Like, it's so fascinating to observe the existence from the point of where we are individuals that inherently do not think that something is magic, for example, exists. We don't believe in a lot of dimensions, and a lot of those dimensions that have kind of that exist still in the world exist under the banner of mysticism and the occult. But
So what do you mean by this?
so, for example, this was actually a bit fun. This is a good example of that. While I was watching something on YouTube, and then I saw that in the early Egypt, mothers. And please let this be early Egypt. If I don't, if I, I hope that I'm not recalling it wrongly. But the mothers had a tendency to give children two names, and the one name was their true name that only her would know, and the other name was given to the public. And here comes why the reason why this was. And this is because the mothers did not want their children to be cursed through means of their own, through their name, through their real name, meaning that like being afraid that that will inflict higher harm on them. So that's like a good example of mysticism and folklore that has kind of gone lost in the technological age. However, what is happening there? Do you find it? Do you understand where I'm going to go with here? This.
Well, first of all, I think that's a perplexing means to an issue that they chose to give two names. It's like I should have the sole right of cursing you by your right name. It's but yes, it's absolutely an interesting way to handle that issue.
Oh, I'm sorry, that issue, that particular issue, just like
Well,
it keeps happening, and they were so smart in the beginning.
Well, how was I going to say? It's hard to be in society without ever being cursed. So it was definitely a very pressing matter that most likely would occur at one point, but
but
it seems a bit excessive.
yeah, was it?
Surface level.
Yeah, surface level, but that's the thing. Like, that's the fascinating dimension. Like, I think that's the most. I mean, yes, world is a very trippy place. But I think that is a very good example of what I'm trying to say. So we don't believe in this dimension of information being having the capacity. Like, it's a bizarre thing. I don't think people have thought of it like that. I don't think today we don't think about these dimensions having capacity to traverse space and time to affect anyone other than the one kind of a cursing potentially, because you're thinking, oh, bad mojo. Like, if you're in a bad mood and you're cursing somebody, that's your own mirror box. It won't affect anyone else. However, that is not entirely true. I think that what there is this dimension that escapes us, that our existence is that constant extension and territorialization where we are carriers of what is happening. And if you look at Wi-Fi, for example, I think this is very interesting speaking about in the context of Wi-Fi. If you spoke to people, I think some 20 years ago, about information traveling through unseen channels that will be able to deliver to their devices every imaginable form of news, I think people would be very reluctant.
To today's extent, most definitely. But if you say 40 years ago, then you definitely.
But let's say, but I want to say actually something 20 years ago because it is quite recent. So there are many people that will believe in these supernatural dimensions of both theological underpinnings and occult ones. So we speak of God, we speak of ghosts, we speak of etc., 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 cursing. And then the question becomes, do we actually believe that this type of, because it's not a question of whether we have seen it or not. The question is whether this type of information can be retained and can be transferred, as in the context of cursing, to actually affect the person in question. And I think just 20 years ago, we would ascribe a lot of things a higher degree of reverence than we do today. Because today, when you think about Wi-Fi, it is essentially something that is unseen, that is sending out information within the scope of where air of like it is fascinating again because we see empty. When we say empty space, we mean this, but this is not empty. This, if air was colored, I would not be able to see my hand, but it's not empty. We are in this amber like structure where we don't think that things have capacity to travel, but they do. We keep affirming that they have the ability to travel.
You're saying that it is a conductor that is able to lead certain information.
Exactly. And artist as a conductor in this sense is not something new. However, I do feel that when artists decide upon the subject they want to work with, or in the context of painters, maybe they don't, maybe they just want to let themselves go in the similar way as I did, you kind of contemplate on yourself as a conductor, and then you kind of contemplate the piece. But people very rarely contemplate why, how, what. I mean, sure what, but not to the extent that I think it's interesting to observe the world through. I'm sorry, this probably is just my own musings, but the depth of the informational loop that exists seems to be much more complex than we initially thought of. And I think these works and the next couple of topics that we will introduce later on are all connected to this dimension of why, what, how, and this understanding that every single thing that we do, every single step we take are highly connected to this idea of the extension. And I think, sorry.
Are you then speaking of the extension, or are you also speaking of that they are traces or parts in becoming you? Or that there tells about you and your persona? Because everything that has happened on this table is a result of conscious and unconscious movements that you have been doing throughout a certain time period. And they all, in a manner, like, of course today it's quite hard, like in general when you look at a person today, we don't have the granularity to look into or especially look back in time, where you can take a segment of someone's life and you can look at how they folded their sweater with which force, where is the crinkles, what is the meticulousness, and all of these things. So, and you don't really look at that. How do they brush their teeth? How do they wash their face? What is their routines? When in the day is it? All of these things. And I would say that